For those who crave more than just reading headlines in their social media feeds.
People need to wake up.
Today's News Talk, TNT.
Darn tootin'. Forget about those headlines in your social media feed. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. We're going to do so with Derek Bros. He is the Conscious Resistance. You can also find him over at thelastamericanvagabond.com. Now, Derek, you sent me an article fast-tracking through this new executive order, digital identification for a number of purposes in this country, also kind of integrated with biometric information, whether that be iris scans or thumb scans or beyond. We've got those lovely face scans, again, that many have been acclimated to with the magic box. It just opens. I can't believe it. Now, although you've had a general populace that has kind of been massaged into this through that type of stuff, it has been absolutely fast-tracked since the COVID-19 84 nightmare. And we have seen actual digital identifications for such purposes as being able to access pornography, for instance, in Australia, now becoming law and the norm. So what are your thoughts on this? With this institution, and even people like Trump talking about identification via the border issue, et cetera, and mainlining it. You know, Trump just talking about criminalizing burning flags. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. This is bad news brown, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, people are kind of getting acclimated already. You mentioned Australia, and I don't think a lot of people realize that Texas itself actually passed a bill in the last year that required verifying your ID in order to access pornography. Now, obviously, pornography is problematic. It can corrupt a young mind, and there's all kinds of issues in that department. But in general, I think the idea of putting some sort of age verification process, which can also be, it's not too difficult to get around it at the moment, but it's still sort of greasing the wheels towards going in that direction, preparing for people to eventually just need an internet ID in order to access the internet itself. And that is, it doesn't fully go into that in terms of this Biden executive order. It's a draft executive order that has been seen by this news outlet notice.org. But it definitely does, as you mentioned, talk about people potentially having to have a mobile driver's license or a digital driver's license or some form of digital ID in order to access government services and different services via the internet. So this draft order, my feeling is that it's going to be one of the last things Biden will do in office, as many presidents do with, right before they leave, they start signing executive orders and things of that sort. So just even the fact that we're getting a little preview of this, it's not the first time Biden has talked about it. He's been kind of teasing this executive order since the spring. It hasn't come about yet, and there are definitely people who are calling for it. And in this particular case, besides the sort of protect the children from porn and things like that, the main call we're seeing in terms of this particular executive order is that during COVID, during the pandemic, there was a lot of fraud, people, scamming and, social security scams and just all kinds of things like that, either defrauding the government or defrauding individuals. And thus the answer that's being presented, the solution that's being presented is digital IDs.
Now, this to me feels like an extension of the Real ID Act. And for those that don't know what Real ID is, for some time you've had the option to get these Real ID licenses in certain states, encouraged in others. And quite frankly, you have to get them in some areas supposedly to fly. At least that was the mantra pre-COVID. That kind of got pulled back, but I can tell you right now, my New York State license is Real ID. I think that my current license in Iowa also has Real ID embedded in it. Believe it or not, folks, there are still some people out there with paper licenses in some states that don't even have their photograph on them. I understand why maybe you'd want to move out of that direction, but when you're talking about something like a digital certificate on a phone, this means that you're going to have to be connected all the time. You're going to have to be in an internet access all the time. The thing that your Real ID doesn't have is a GPS locator all the time. What will is the magic box that has your digital identification. And we're already seeing people moved out of access without that type of thing. We talk about the massaging with your device and social media, et cetera. But for instance, where they held the Democratic National Convention, That is your ticket. There are no physical tickets anymore. Literally, even if I went there, if you go to buy a physical ticket, you can't. You have to have your phone because they text you the ticket right there at the booth. There's no scalping. It's right in front of you. And by the way, it's a no cash place. So you need your credit card or your phone to purchase anything in the arena. And you would imagine they will probably move that credit card away and move you towards the phone, especially if you get biometric data involved in that, no?
Absolutely. And this, in terms of, well, two things. You mentioned the Real ID. The interesting thing about that is that folks might remember that came about in 2005. So post 9/11 era, we need to get everybody on IDs, and it's going to help prevent terrorism. At that point, and really for the last 20 years, there actually has been some resistance, as you mentioned, where some states have gone along with it. Other states are still resisting. I think there's at least a dozen who still have said no. So they've had to extend the Real ID from, okay, we're going to start it in 2010 and 2012 and 2015. And even I was at the airport recently, and they have the signs about the Real ID, and it's like, prepare on this date, you need to have your Real ID. And that was scratched out and updated with a new date. And so it has been slow moving on that front, but I do think that they have been making progress in recent years. Particularly, obviously, COVID times got a lot of people used to having a vaccine passport or immunity passport in the form of something on their phone. And as you mentioned, there are many, many businesses going cashless and services being offered where it's all just on the phone. There's not even anything physical. And that is all about, I believe, corralling people further towards being on smartphones, a smart grid, and that you really can't exist in normal society without it, which we're kind of already there. But if that becomes law, as this executive order seems to indicate, because, well, again, the Real ID, mobile driver's license, digital driver's license, some states already are doing those things, but this executive order would be a nationwide plan. So that would be the major changes. We would go from being a few states here and there to being, this is the deal now across the country. And it also specifically mentioned the website login.gov, which I believe is already used for some people to log in and access some of their services like Social Security and things like that. This would essentially potentially be the place where you have to log in to access the internet, to access, you update your driver's license, update anything that you have, anything government related. You would need to have this mobile driver's license, digital driver's license, Real ID, whatever they want to call it. And it would probably be through this central government portal. And I do believe that will be another step in that direction of there's just an internet ID. There's a program you have to access. And as you and I and others have been warning about for years, this is all part of the bigger plan to get people on that one app to rule them all, like we know that Elon and others are working on, like they have in China with WeChat, where it's got your bank information, it's got your health information, it's got your social credit score. And you really can't do anything, even go shopping in some cases, because you got to show that ID to enter into a place. You got to scan it to get into the business. And they're going to sell these features and these programs through convenience or the scare tactics of this will prevent fraud, this will prevent terrorism, it's going to protect children, video games, any number of ways that they can think of to get the average person to be even more comfortable with using that phone for everything. And really, for some people who are really plugged into their phones already and using them for everything they do, and like you said, scanning the faces, it probably won't be that big of a leap for them.
So when you look at not only not that big of a leap, and you look at the integration of these biometrics, you mentioned the fact that anybody that wants to access certain government programs are going to be beholden to this. And I would argue that we're already in a society in the United States where 40+% of people are on some kind of government dole. If you got Social Security, if you got Medicare, Medicaid, EBT, I could go down the line. There's a dozen other programs. I mean, you're a veteran and you want, all these different things. If you want to tap into them, you have to go through the government. You can only imagine those are the first things that this is going to be integrated on. So eventually, when it is a license, you already have almost half of the populace adhering to it.
Absolutely. I definitely think that is exactly where it's going to start, Jason, with people who, for one reason or another, either just because they're in poverty and they're dependent on government for, welfare check or whatever, or just veterans who are disabled who do depend on that money. I've talked to people regularly. I had a gentleman reach out to me, say, I'm 80 years old. I get $800 a month from Social Security. What do I do to avoid the digital IDs? What do I do to avoid the CBDCs? And there's really no easy answer for those people in those situations. I don't claim to have those answers, but absolutely, I do believe that is where they're going to start. The people who are already kind of plugged into the government systems and are dependent on them and can't really even, put up a protest and say, no, I'm going to avoid this. I'm not going to comply. If they want to get their check that month, which again, many people are dependent on for their bills and their food and everything else, they're going to have to play the game, unfortunately. And I don't think that's an ideal situation, but it's definitely likely that is where these programs will start.
Well, that is the problem. We have such, I would say, a large amount of the general populace that has now adhered to this learned helplessness and don't think that they can get by without big daddy government or big mommy government. And they're going to be just all too quick, like you said. And even the ones that have that aha moment, they're going to feel entrapped by the system because they realize that all of a sudden they're going to have to make big changes in their life if they want to get out of that system, and may not be easy. And hey, maybe impossible for some. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to expand on that with Derek Bros. You can check him out over at theconsciousresistance.com. More TNT after this.
I have some even more exciting news.
TNT Radio News.
Matt Boyland here with your TNT headlines. Donald Trump has repeated his pledge to jail anyone who burns the American flag, an act which is bizarrely protected under the First Amendment. We're being told 2 American astronauts who've spent the past 80 days stranded on the International Space Station will remain stuck in space for another 6 months. And Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg has admitted he regrets working with the White House to censor content during the COVID pandemic.
Where progress is influenced by revolution and evolution. We're today's News Talk, TNT.
Now, one of the other aspects of a program like this is it acts as a bridge to the Internet of Bodies, right? Through that biometric information. You also mentioned social credit score possibilities, and you and I have also discussed universal basic income. Now, in your work over the last year plus at the Last American Vagabond, you've talked about some of this fast tracking technology, etc. But when we've talked about a UBI, you and I have discussed Sam Altman's Worldcoin as, a possibility. Now, Altman is actually in some hot water this week, and there are charges within, I believe, 5 different nations where he has launched this Worldcoin that they have a data breach of this private the surveillance technology. So, in other words, your biometrics, which essentially, for those that don't know, this service for you to sign up for Worldcoin, you have to scan your biometrics in a steampunk orb-like structure that reminds me of the Lochnar. And through that, that's supposed to verify you as being human as a not two-factor authenticator via encryption, but the biological biometric authenticator. You're absolutely human. This seems like a bump in the road. You go ahead.
I was going to say I hadn't seen that news about Sam Altman, but I'm not surprised based on what we've already been seeing.
Well, let's talk about that, because obviously you're now, as a private company, taking people's biometric information. That's not necessarily new, as again, anybody with one of the, oh, look at my thumb, it actually worked. Here you go. They're doing it too. We've seen breaches at Apple, at Samsung, at Sony, etc., all devices that would have that type of thing. But now we're talking about incorporating it a la Internet of Bodies into a currency, right? So you are kind of on this different level, but I would also assume that in some of these cases, Altman's going to beat it. And where he doesn't beat it, I would imagine those regions are going to be targeted and eventually bought out and massaged. And it won't be Altman's Worldcoin. It will be another flavor of the same thing, no?
Yeah, and this is what has worried me about WorldCoin since the beginning. I did an investigation, I think last year or the year before when it was first launching. And, if you look at the places that WorldCoin, where it's going, most of it is developing nations, third world countries, poor countries where people, if you tell them like, hey, scan your face and we're going to start giving you, like you said, it's basically universal basic income, or it's the beginning of a similar concept at least. There's going to be a lot of people that lined up. And in fact, I'm here in Mexico right now. I know that they went to Mexico City, and I saw videos online when they did that. And they were about a mile long, Jason, of people just lined up, not even questioning. They went to Indonesia, they went to India and other places where people really are hard up for any extra cash that they can get. And they also aren't as informed as maybe some of us in the West as far as privacy, the dangers of just letting any random person scan your face, and who's going to hold that data, and where's that data going to go, and how's it going to be used against you later. Most people don't even really understand, or especially in these developing nations, don't really understand how important that biometric data is to themselves, and also how that data is seen as the new oil to these big companies. So I think that alone is problematic. So it doesn't surprise me to see him getting in some issues. And also in terms of WorldCoin, whether that's going to be, the new world order, universal basic income or not, it's definitely something like that. And as you mentioned, it's literally this silver little ball. They even call it an orb that you stare into, and then it like scans your eyes and your face. And it promises they're going to give you a coin. I don't even know if they've delivered on those promises and if those coins are worth anything, right? Because I haven't heard anybody talking about investing in WorldCoin. And I'm sure
Well, let me say this, Derek.
Them.
I did have some viewers when I first covered it that I said, I can't invest in that. No, it did. I think it 10 to 100x'd depending on how. Yeah, like from the launch. I don't know where it is today, but I do know a bunch of people that made some scratch. And from what I do understand, it has kept its word that you get the one WorldCoin as long as you use the verification method that it provides at least once a month. But you know what? Let's just move on just a little bit from that into currency right now, right? Because when we talk about the adoption of some type of digital currency, the currency in this country has never been worth less. I'm sorry. Like, you go to the grocery store, inflation is very, very real. Fast food is extremely expensive. You want real eggs? Forget about it. Still on the rise. It made a dip for a while, but right back up there. Butter has doubled, etc. Gas in many places has doubled. I don't know what it's at in Texas, but in some places in California, you're tasting $6-7 a gallon, my friend. So with all that being said, is there the possibility of some type of, financial collapse that maybe doesn't get rid of the dollar, but further incentivizes a program like this, whether it be WorldCoin or something else, that, like you said, those people that are lined up a mile outside, they're in extreme poverty. Well, a lot of people, their whole lifestyle is based on debt at this point. And it has caught up to them in many, many regards. And they no longer own the properties. They're clawing on to keep that mortgage up, et cetera. And those people, even if they're not on some kind of a dole now, would be more than willing to accept some type of relief if all of a sudden, instantaneously, they couldn't go paycheck to paycheck.
I think you're 100% right. And whether it is something like a WorldCoin, or I think we talked about it recently after I went to Bitcoin Nashville, this idea of the Bitcoin dollar that Mark Godwin and Whitney Webb have been writing about, and also stable coins like Tether and others, which have the backing of Larry Fink and BlackRock. I definitely think that although the dollar is, as you mentioned, we're experiencing inflation and hyperinflation, it appears as inevitable as ever. They just keep papering over it and making it, hang on a little bit longer. I definitely think that something to that impact, whether it's a new thing like WorldCoin, or it's a stable coin, or it's just Bitcoin pegged to the dollar, getting people introduced to some sort of digital currency that can be tracked and traced, while they're also keeping them, as you said, on the dole of, however much money per month. They gave everybody that $1,200 little stipend during COVID, and people ran and collected that with no questions asked. I don't think those things are far off. And that, of course, ties into our first topic about the digital identity and this digital driver's license, your way to get on the internet, your way to protect yourself against fraud. You add the digital wallet to that, and then the whole thing's complete. One app to rule them all.
Kind of depressing, my friend. Let everybody else know Always fun talking to you, Derek. Let everybody else out there know what you got going on, not only at the Conscious Resistance, but the Last American Vagabond, and how they can check out and support your work, brother.
Absolutely. Yeah, my main website is theconsciousresistance.com. I encourage people to check that out. I just released a new podcast yesterday. I release a weekly live show on Monday evenings. I've got a new investigation coming out this week, pretty much picking up on the conversation we're having here, starting with the Biden administration's executive order and then diving deeper into the conversation about digital identities. And as you alluded to earlier, it's not just the Biden administration. Trump has talked about a biometric entry and exit program regarding immigration and stuff like that. So it's coming at us in multiple ways, and people can find that at theconsciousresistance.com or thelast.americanvagabond.com.
Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and if you enjoyed that segment, I want to let you know that I am live 5 days a week over at TNT.news, and if you go there, you can also interact in the chat. It is 3 to 5 Eastern Time. We are global, baby. So again, if you dug that segment, please come check me out every Monday through Friday at TNT.news.